Let me start the recording and we'll get started. Welcome everyone to QuickBooks Online Certification Preparation Training Part 2. My name is Hector Garcia. I'm an Advanced Certified QuickBooks Pro Advisor, and there's my email on the screen if you need to contact me for whatever reason. I will be your trainer for today. Very important, you want to check out qbtrainingevents.com. There's 3 sections: webinars to access this type of webinars, in-person training, so whenever Intuit travels to different cities to do on-site live training, those will all be located there, and virtual conferences that include advanced training for folks that have already gone through the basic certification, which is one of the things that you're doing today. In preparation for today, it's really important that you've watched the first section, that you've signed up for the free ProAdvisor program so you can access your ProAdvisor account and all the certification materials. We will have one 10-minute break around halfway through, and we will cover, again, questions that are related to the content. And if you want to check out QuickBooks or play with it kind of in a second screen while we're doing this, you can use the link that's on the slides, or you can just Google QBO test drive and you should be able to go straight into a sample QBO file. At the end of this webinar, it is advisable that you go to the your ProAdvisor account, click on ProAdvisor, click on training, search for QuickBooks Online Certification, get started, and do the last 5 modules of this 7-part exam. Again, it's a 7-section or 7-module exam. You will have multiple choices. You will submit each section for grading, but you will not get grade until you submit all 7 sections in one shot. So you can save your progress by submitting the entire section or module, and you must get an 80% to pass. If you fail or do not pass, you will get up to 3 attempts to pass each of the sections. If you fail 3 times all the sections, there will be a 60-day lockout, and you will be able to retake the test again within 60 days. On this particular second part, we will cover sections 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are shorter exams. On the first part, the one that we did on Monday, we covered sections 1 and 2. So hopefully you got those done completely. So let's get right to it. Real quick, if you still want to access part 1, I have posted the recording of the webinar in YouTube. I have copy and pasted the link to the recording in the chat section. So if you actually look in the chat section, you should see that YouTube link, or the one you see on the screen. Take a picture of it if you want to type it by hand later on. That's the first recording, which, by the way, if you attended the first one, you should have received an email with access to that recording. But just in case you didn't attend it, there's the link to it, and that's about 2.5 hours. And that was module 1 and module 2. For part 2, which we're about to embark in the next 2.5 hours, we're going to cover module 3 to 7, banking and tools, reports, managing your work. This is as an accounting professional, preparing your clients' books, and some solutions for your clients beyond what QuickBooks offers. So let's start with module 3, banking and tools. So module 3, banking and tools. And at the end of this section, you understand what the bank feeds means, which is how QuickBooks downloads transactions from the bank directly, and what do you do with those downloads once they come in, what type of work are you supposed to do around that, and what does that work look like when you download those transactions into QuickBooks. So the first thing is QuickBooks will check, after it downloads the transactions from the bank, it will check to see if there's a similar transaction that has been posted. If the transaction has not been reconciled, that you've gone through a bank reconciliation before, it will try to match or suggest that you match the transaction. If there are transactions that are repeated, sort of when you go to the same gas station or the same restaurant, over time, QuickBooks will actually learn and recognize what these transactions are, and it will speed up your work. Okay, you're still totally in control. You get to choose what transactions get added and not added, and you get full control about how these transactions get added into the books. It's just really important to understand what that workflow looks like. So the first thing is when you download the transactions from the bank, they stay in the banking section. This is called the bank center or the banking center. Again, some people call this bank feeds. And you would notice that all the transactions are listed, and you will have a couple of transactions that have an action item called add. And anything that has the word add next to it, that means you will be creating a brand new transaction from scratch using the bank information. However, when QuickBooks recognizes that a transaction looks like the one that has just been downloaded, because you've entered it in QuickBooks before you did the download, it will actually attempt to do a match. And a match is when a similar transaction that's already in your books, already in your register, looks a lot like the one that has been downloaded. And so what that means is you will have the option at that point to match it, or you can do something else. So that match button on the right hand of the screen, that's what it does. It confirms that something that's already in QuickBooks has been downloaded from the bank, and there's no additional transaction that needs to be created because that transaction is already on the book. So that match portion is just really, really important to understand right off the bat. Now, there are some really nice options. If you click on the small gear or the settings button on the right side of the screen, you'll be able to open that menu and you'll be able to pick and choose some of the columns that you want to see. And some of the real powerful features that you have is there's a little checkbox next to an option that says copy bank detail into memo. And what that does is it actually takes the actual verbiage from the bank, what you download from the bank, and it adds it into the memo section. So after you've categorized it or matched it or whatever you've done with that transaction, adding that additional text may include some context in the future for you to verify that this transaction has been categorized correctly, or it adds some additional information that could be pertinent when you're reviewing the books afterwards. Now there's another checkbox called Show Bank Details. Now this is really, really important. Show Bank Details means on the screen in which I'm viewing the transactions that have just been downloaded, I actually want to see the bank text or the actual literal information the bank is giving me from the bank download. If I don't click on Show Bank Details, QuickBooks will actually clean up the data and attempt to give you sort of a more palatable and easier to read bank information. However, QuickBooks is still sort of learning and is going through the interpretation process of getting this long form codified information that comes from the bank into simplified format, and many a times QuickBooks will interpret it wrong and potentially give you contextually the wrong information, and you'll categorize transactions wrong. So having overriding that by clicking on Show Bank Details just shows you literally exactly what comes through the bank. So that's really what I would suggest, is to play around with that option of Show Bank Details or not Show Bank Details for you to see that. Now, there's also something called Find Match. So there are some cases in which the transaction doesn't match what you've entered in QuickBooks exactly. In some cases, it is maybe because you have multiple customer payments all deposited into one batch, and the dollar amounts don't match 100%. And maybe you need to tell QuickBooks, look, this one transaction that came through the bank, for example, what you see on the screen, $1,375. This one transaction doesn't match 100% one single transaction that's in QuickBooks, but there are possibly multiple transactions or multiple customer deposits that add up to that one. So in events like that, QuickBooks will not automatically match because there's not a one-to-one relationship with what's in QuickBooks with what's coming with the bank. And then you would actually click on Find Match to search through all the transactions to see what are the possible ones that match up. Now in this particular case, if you notice what the next screen will look like, it will show you all the open transactions that have not been matched before. And if there happens to be one that matches one-to-one, you can select it at that point. Or maybe in some cases, your customer will pay you maybe a smaller dollar amount that the amount that gets, it will pay you a bigger amount that what gets deposited into the bank. And this happens when they pay you with a wire transfer and the bank takes a wire fee, or maybe with a credit card, and in the batch the credit card merchant takes out a fee. And in some cases, you can match the transaction, but you have to also resolve the difference or tell QuickBooks that even though the two transactions match or the combination of transactions match, the dollar amount doesn't match because there is sort of an underlying charge in the middle at some point. So that's what that resolve difference means. That's not very common where you have to do that, but it's all just basically case by case based on the differences. Then at the end, once you complete creating the transaction or matching it, you'll be able to click on the In QuickBooks tab. So you went from Your Review tab. So at first we were in the For Review tab, and then we went to the In QuickBooks tab. And then the In QuickBooks tab will show you all of the bank transactions that were downloaded and either matched or created from scratch during the bank feeds process. Now, there's also something called a transfer, and this gets a little bit tricky. A transfer is a transaction in which money is being moved from one balance sheet account to another balance sheet account. So a typical example is we're moving money from a checking account to a savings account. So whenever QuickBooks sees a transaction that goes from balance sheet to balance sheet account, it will actually not give you an add option, it would give you a transfer option. And if this transfer was created beforehand, it would at that point be just a match because the transaction was created before the bank download was made. But if the transfer was not booked into QuickBooks before, this same transaction would say transfer on the right hand side instead of match. So again, match means the transaction is already in QuickBooks prior to the bank download, and QuickBooks is not going to create an additional transaction. It's just going to match it, so it doesn't prompt you to do anything else with that downloaded transaction. Now, once you have one record found or multiple records found, you can actually click on the transaction itself, and you can see a detail of all the potential transactions that could match. So if you happen to have more than one transfer for $200, as of in this example, it would actually show you all the potential transactions that could match based on a dollar amount. And then it will sort them based on date, obviously assuming that the one date closest to the transaction date that was downloaded from the bank, it's quite possibly the most legitimate one or the one that actually matches that. But it is possible that you may have more than one transfer or transaction that you would match, assuming that you have multiple transactions with the same dollar amount. Now, let's talk about adding manual transactions. When we add transactions not matching, this is adding, that means that this transaction was never added into QuickBooks before the bank download, and we're using the bank download as a worksheet to enter or create new transactions into a register. It is really important to enable the Payee column. The Payee column is the vendor list or customer list or employee list that we're going to use to match the transaction against that name in the vendor list, customer list, or employee list that is inside of QuickBooks. QuickBooks will download a quote-unquote payee name that's cleaned up and organized for you, but you still have to translate that payee name that comes from the bank into the one from your database. At the end of the day, your QuickBooks database of vendors is what QuickBooks will do to organize transactions by that particular payee. So you want to enable that payee, and you want to select that payee with every single one of those transactions. Now, when we're creating a new transaction, the example of this check, if you see on the screen, check 103, when we're creating a new transaction, we're going to select both the payee and the expense category. Now, it's not always going to be an expense. There are cases in which we have a bank expenditure that's actually an investment of an asset or a payment of a loan or something like that. But in most cases, these are going to be expenses, and we want to select the correct expense category in that second column that you see there. On the memo section, it will copy the information that came from the bank, so it just says check 103. You can actually add some additional notes to the memo section if you want to at that point. Now, I'm going to click on the In QuickBooks tab just so I can see all the transactions that were created through the bank feeds. I notice that we have matched two transactions, and also we have added a transaction and you see the amount is negative because it's an expenditure. That's basically what it's telling you. And you can actually click on the sort of a clickable link next to where it says add and that would actually take you straight into the transaction if you want to review the transaction in detail. And you can also click on undo if you made a mistake and put it in the wrong place. You can click on undo, send it back for your review, and at that point you can then select the correct category or the correct vendor, assuming that you are going to change it because you did it wrong in the first place. Now, when you manually add a transfer, that's whenever there is in fact a transfer from balance sheet account to balance sheet account, but it was not created in QuickBooks prior to the download. So it actually, QuickBooks will encourage you or show you the path to creating a new transaction as a transfer. Again, a transfer is a transaction in which money is being moved from one balance sheet account to another balance sheet account. Once again, just to answer some questions, this is being recorded, so you will have access to the full webinar. So if for whatever reason the audio cuts off, because it does happen to some folks where audio cuts off because of their internet connection, on the recordings, typically the audio is pretty flawless. So if you miss anything, just watch out for the recording and you should be able to watch the entire presentation again. Now, you could also manage your bank feeds through the mobile app. So the experience is a little bit different just because you have a lot less space to work with in a tablet or an iPhone or something like that. But you can actually manage your banking, select your categories, and all that stuff all within the app. And the app has more functionality. You can see basic reports, create invoices, and that's all free, included with the QuickBooks Online subscription. And let's move on to excluding bank transactions. So in here, we're going to talk about excluding bank transactions, which means that the bank downloaded the transactions and we don't want to put them in QuickBooks. Now, why would we want to exclude bank transactions? So a couple of use cases that are really important is, let's say, for example, that we have already reconciled the bank all the way up to January 31st, 2018. Then we connect the bank, and depending on when we connected the bank, QuickBooks downloaded February and moving forward, and it brought in maybe some transactions from from January. If we don't want those transactions to be duplicated or potentially duplicated, because maybe those transactions have already been reconciled, we can actually hand select every transaction that we want to exclude. And what exclude does, it actually doesn't delete anything in your current books. What exclude does is remove them from the list, so you're not prompted to do something else with them because those transactions already happen to be in the books. Now, one of the most common questions that we get is, if they're already in the books, why wouldn't QuickBooks just ask you to match them? Now, the trick with QuickBooks is it will only match transactions if they haven't already been matched with something else or if they have not been reconciled. So that's a typical use case where we've already reconciled the banks and we want to exclude things because we don't want to potentially duplicate them, because we know for a fact that, for example, we already finished reconciling all of January. The only transactions you should be bringing are February moving forward, again, because we already reconciled January. Okay, so that's the point of excluding. Now let's talk about bank rules. Now, bank rules is, think about it as the artificial intelligence that you're developing for QuickBooks to then take certain hints from the transactions being downloaded, things like the payee name or the memo, and use that information to automatically categorize transactions. By the way, somebody's asking what was the answer to the polling question that we asked earlier. The bank feeds functionality brings transactions directly into the banking center. The answer was true. That was true. That polling question was true. Okay, so let's move on to bank rules. Bank rules allows you to automate the categorization of transactions into bank feed, including assignment of transaction type, category, payee, class, and location. You can also use bank rules to split transactions. This is maybe when we have a transaction that should be 50-50, 50% business, 50% personal, something like that. You would use a split. there's cases of cases in which you would want to do a split. Rules also allows you to prioritize over other rules. So you can pick a few rules that are more pertinent than other rules, just in case we have conflicting text within the information that's coming from the bank. For example, the word American shows up in a lot of bank transactions. We have American Airlines, American Eagle, American Pride, American Girl. There's just so many companies that have the word American. And if for whatever reason you create a rule that says, hey, if you see the word American, automatically make it, or by default, make it American Airlines, you can create other rules that say, wait, hold on, if it says American Eagle, that's one thing. If it says American Express, that's another thing. So you can create rules that, in case that there's conflicting text, you can actually prioritize them and put in order, just in case one rule is more important than the other ones, and then the other ones are there to just catch up or catch all the ones that you didn't create a rule for. Now you can also create bank rules automatically as transactions are being created. So we'll talk about that as well. So if you click on the banking tab on the left hand side of the screen, and then you click on the bank rules tab next to banking on the top, you're going to go into bank rules. Usually when you first go into bank rules, it should say no rules, and the rules should be empty, or there should be maybe one or two sample rules there. We're going to click on new rule to create a brand new rule from scratch. And the rule has a couple of really important components. Component one, the rule name. That's only used for you to understand what the rule is, just in case you need to change it later. 4 is money in or money out. So you're going to have rules for deposits and sort of money coming in, bank credits. And then you're going to have rules for checks and bank debits. You can also create a rule for all bank transactions or a specific set of bank transactions. Then the criteria has to do with the bank text or the bank memo. You can actually choose and type, look, based on what's coming in the bank text and the bank memo, I want you to use that wording to determine what the category should be. The transaction type, usually it's an expense or a check when it's a expense type of transaction, or it's a deposit when it's a money in type of transaction. Either way, you would pick the default transaction type. This is typically for expenses, is the most common case. You pick the payee that you want that automatically to fall into based on our vendor database, and the category. There's also a little checkbox that says automatically add to the books. So if you don't want QuickBooks Online to ask you to confirm or verify that that transaction should be going into utilities, and you want to just skip it because you have a high level of confidence that that payee is always going to be that category, you can just click add automatically to QuickBooks, and it will skip the process of waiting for you to click on add in order to add it into your books. As you create the rules, you can change the order and drag and drop them if you want to change the priority of them. Again, that priority is only important if you got 2 or more rules with similar wordings in the bank text or in the bank memo. Now, once you download the bank transactions and you are applying the bank rules, you're going to notice that QuickBooks will add a little tag on it that says rule right before the category, letting you know that this was categorized through the explicit rules. So through the explicit rules. If you don't see the word rule in it and you do see it green, that is letting you know that QuickBooks is guessing or using the history to suggest a category, but it wasn't an explicit rule. It was based on previous transactions. If it's got the rule button in it, that means it used an actual rule that you created by hand before downloading the transactions. Now you can modify on the fly that transaction if the rule doesn't apply. So if you think that that rule in that particular transaction doesn't apply, you can change the payee or the category if you want to. And then once you click on that transaction, there's actually a little link that says rule applied. And if you click straight into rule applied, it will take you back into that rule in case you need to modify it. Or if you don't need to modify anything, you just click on add and it will add that transaction into QuickBooks. When you click on the In QuickBooks tab, we went from Your Review to In QuickBooks. So we went from Your Review to In QuickBooks. you can see the history of how the transaction was entered, and you would see on the rule column the fact that the transaction was added through the rules. And that will let you know contextually, as you're verifying the things that are being entered, you will know contextually whether that was added through something you matched, you selected the category by hand, or a rule was applied. And you can choose at that point if you want to undo it or not do anything at that point. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you got that little checkbox that says automatically add to books, and that's really up to you. And that's if you want to skip the process in which you confirm or accept that bank rule. Last piece is reconciling the bank. So after we download all the transactions from QuickBooks, we add new transactions, match existing transactions, whether it was done through the rules or manually choosing the category each time. The idea is that we reconcile the bank to make sure that all the debits and all the credits that are inside QuickBooks match what's on the bank statement. Now, because of bank download, the workflow for reconciling, it's a lot different. Up to the point that a lot of folks that were spending an hour or two to reconcile 1 month bank statement are now reporting that it's taking them 10 minutes or 50 minutes to reconcile the bank statements, because all the stuff is sort of happening automatically as you download the transactions. So after you download, you're going to click on the gear menu on the right of the screen, and then you're going to click on reconcile. That's going to take you into the reconciliation screen. First thing you want to do is you want to select the bank account or credit card account you want to reconcile. Then you want to enter the ending bank balance, and that ending bank balance comes from your paper statement that usually you have in your hand, or maybe a PDF that you have in a second screen. And then you're going to read the ending date of that statement and type it in there. So at the end of the day, once we click on start reconciling, we should be able to see all the debits and all the credits, all the deposits and all the payments that match up with QuickBooks. If you downloaded it through the bank, or it's been matched through the bank, you would see in the column where there's two little boxes, you will see 2 green boxes next to it letting you know that transaction was downloaded through the bank. You will see a check mark all the way to the right for every transaction that has been marked as cleared. A cleared transaction is a transaction that has been confirmed to have gone through the bank. Any transactions that you see that are uncleared, this could be potential errors or maybe outstanding checks that you know for a fact are going to clear on the next month. But can't always make the assumption. You may have to research one by one to see why there are any uncleared transactions. In most cases, you should have 0 uncleared transactions, or you should only have actual outstanding checks as clear transactions. On the left hand side of the screen, you can filter to hide any transactions that have a date beyond the statement date. That way you're not looking at any future transactions, which makes sense because when you're reconciling up to that date on the statement. And then at the end of the day, once you check and confirm all the transactions that were in the bank, the total difference should be 0. And a difference of 0, it's what we call reconciled bank. Now, remember, if you reconcile the bank and there's absolutely no outstanding transactions, the bank balance and the QuickBooks balance will match 100%. If there is outstanding transactions, you can actually click on View Report, and in the report itself, you're going to see the register balance, and you're going to see the cleared balance. And the difference between the cleared balance and the register balance would be any transactions listed as an uncleared transaction. So you can print these reports and keep a record of why there's a difference between the balance sheet and your bank statement, because that balance sheet and the difference between the balance sheet and the bank statement would be all those unclear transactions. So I really appreciate that. I really suggest that you print that report and have a real clear idea of what those transactions are unclear are, and hopefully you are researching them. Now, if you forget to print it or show the report, you can always go back to the report by clicking on Reconcile and clicking on History by Account. Also, if a transaction has been changed after you have reconciled, which I would say is possibly the most valuable piece of the reconciliation process. If there's any transactions being changed, QuickBooks will actually show you all the transactions that have been changed afterwards. Now, if you want to manually test this, reconcile the banks, go to one of the transactions that have been cleared and modify the dollar amount, for example. And this is a common use case. Mostly accountants don't make these mistakes, but a lot of times after the accountants change something in a reconciled transaction, end users that don't have much experience tend to, for whatever reason, go back and change transactions that have already been cleared. Now, the end user gets a warning that says, hey, by the way, this transaction has been reconciled. You probably should not change the dollar amount, but the user could always just hit yes and completely ignore the question box. So really important as an accounting professional and you want to troubleshoot some of these balance issues, you can always go to a reconciliation change report right there when you click on reconcile and history by account, and you can see a list of all the transactions that were changed after they were reconciled. And what's really neat is you can actually click on the transaction at that point and change it to correct it. So this is a very common issue that happens whenever we're going to reconcile the next month or the following month and our beginning balance do not match. This is actually something that accounting professionals spend a lot of time doing, just cleaning this up and organizing this. Now, if you click on the button that says help me fix it when you have a beginning balance issue and you have been reconciling, you will have a list of all the transactions that were changed, and you would have a clear path to changing the dollar amount or whatever correction you need to make to get back into a correct beginning balance. So that's just a really important piece. Also, you can undo a reconciliation if you believe reconciliations have been done severely wrong, and the easiest thing to do is just to go back and unreconcile a few months. You can click on history by account. You can select the last month that was reconciled. You can click on the actions column where it says view report. There's a little arrow you can click, and you can click on undo. And you can undo month by month, or you can undo several months in one shot. It will give you one warning. Just, hey, are you sure you want to undo the reconciliation? And at that point, you can choose, cancel or move forward and undo the reconciliation. Really important, end users don't have access to the undo reconciliation feature. You must be logged in as an accountant to be able to undo any reconciliations. By far, my personal opinion is that what QuickBooks Online really excels above the rest and the competitors is, especially even against QuickBooks Desktop, it is on bank feeds. So check out the chat section below for a link to that if you want to watch that video. Okay, so let's move on to recurring transactions. So one of the awesome features that QuickBooks has is the ability to create one transaction and automate how the transaction gets automatically created over time. Now, there are multiple cases in which you want to create recurring transactions. For example, if we have a client that has a fixed monthly contract for services we provide, strongly suggest that you automate those invoices. Very common for landscapers, home service professionals. In some cases, you have accounting professionals also that offer fixed monthly services. So the best thing to do is to automate the invoicing by creating invoices automatically. There are other cases in which you receive a bill and accounts payable of the same exact dollar amount every month. For example, you can have your landlord send you your bill for your rent, and that's going to be the same dollar amount every month. So that's something that you would want to automate. Now, things like journal entries, checks, deposits, expenses for vendors that you pay with debit cards, that stuff is not that common to be the exact same dollar amount each month, but there are cases in which you would want to do that. So in order to create a recurring transaction, you want to click on the quick create button, the plus sign with a circle inside of a circle on the top of the screen, and then you want to click on recurring transactions. Once you click on recurring transactions, you will have a list of all the recurring transactions that have previously been booked in your QuickBooks. If you have none, that would just be a blank screen. You will click on new to create a brand new recurring transaction. you would choose the type. So am I creating a recurring bill, a recurring invoice? If I'm being charged a fixed dollar amount automatically to my bank via direct debit or ACH, an expense would be a great thing for you to create a recurring transaction for. So you click OK. Then you name your template. The name of the template is not that important, but it is important for you to go back and make changes to it after the fact. You can put type scheduled. That means created automatically. You can pick the starting date of the transaction, and that's going to be the same date over and over the same month if you choose sort of a monthly interval. And then create days in advance is how much time before the actual transaction date you want this to show up in your books. So if you want to know 3, 4, 5 days before the money comes out of the bank, you want to know that that money is coming out. You want to maybe create that a couple of days before so it shows up in your register before that transaction date. Now, you would definitely pick the payee and the account where that automatic expense is coming out from. That's obviously just really, really important things to do. Once you're done, you click on Save Template and your recurrent transaction will be created. You can edit, delete it, stop it, do whatever you want after you have created it. Okay, let's move on to reports. Now, quite possibly one of the most important reasons why people do anything, input a bunch of information so then can create a report or an output for the information. So we'll be able to navigate through the reports, understand a little bit about cash and accrual basis, and then understand what the value of the basic reports is for your clients and what type of reports we have in different subscription level. So let's talk about your client, Terry, for example. You want to have a clear snapshot of how they're doing. So you can provide valuable insights into reports. For example, you can show profit and loss balance sheet, which will allow you to show the financial position of the business. You can show the results of the operations for a specific period of time. So if they want to know how they did last month, last quarter, current year, you'll be able to do that. You can run reports by item, and you can have some sort of statistical information about what items are being sold the most or how much profit you're making per item. And you can have information about sales by customers, expenses by vendors, and that sort of thing. The first really important concept that you need to understand is an accounting concept. In QuickBooks, there's something called a cash basis report, which means that income is only recognized when you receive a payment. So if you have an open invoice without a payment, income will not be recognized under cash basis. If you have an expenditure, it would only be recognized on the day that it was paid. So if you enter a bill that has not been paid yet, that expense will not show up in your profit and loss until that payment is actually made. Accrual basis is a little bit different. Accrual basis will show income of an invoice even if it hasn't been paid, and it will show invoice of an expense for a bill that you create even if it hasn't been paid either. So accrual basis shows you your profit and loss and your financial statements based on every transaction you have created, regardless of payment status, and cash basis will only focus on paid transactions. Now, once we click on the Reports tab on the left-hand side of the screen, these will actually be grouped into 3 categories. You will see all the reports all in one shot. You're going to see the custom reports. These are reports that we have customized and saved. And there's management reports. The management reports are sort of a pre-formatted, professionally formatted reports that are there to be packaged so you can have sort of multiple reports in a single PDF package. Now, these reports, once you click on all, they're also grouped by general functions. So we'll have, business overview. We'll have who owes you, which are sort of your customer and receivables information. You will have who you owe, which is your vendor and expense information. You will have information about your employees and other items like accountant type of reports, like trial balances, general ledgers, journal reports, that sort of thing. And of course, you can have employees and payroll reports as well. As I mentioned earlier, if you open a report and you save and customize it, that's going to be saved under custom reports. And then again, if you're looking for sort of a package of a couple of reports bundled into a single Word document or PDF document, you will use management reports. Now, let's talk briefly about what reports are included under the different subscription levels. So, for example, QuickBooks Online Plus is the only version of QuickBooks that can track information by class or location. Therefore, any reports like profit and loss by location, profit and loss by class would only be in QuickBooks Online Plus. For example, you need to have QuickBooks Online Essentials or Plus if you want to track accounts payable. Therefore, you would not see any accounts payable type of reports inside of QuickBooks Online Simple Start. You would have to be in Essentials or Plus to see this type of things. So the reports also follow the type of functionality or limited functionality that QuickBooks has. Now we have a question here from the group here that says, is recurrent transactions only available to accountants or certain clients? So the answer to that is you need to be on Essentials or Plus for recurring transactions. Now let's talk about running basic reports. So any report that has AR or accounts receivable will show open invoices or balances on invoices by customer. This is the money that your customer owes you. An AR aging summary would be a report that organizes all of your customers' monies that are owed to you, but it's grouped based on how old the invoices are, more specifically based on their due date. So if the invoices are current, they would be under the current column. If they're late by 1 to 3 days or 31 to 60 days, you're going to see those dollar amounts organized by that column. So you can gauge more or less, which customers are at risk of not paying you or defaulting because they haven't paid you in a long time. Now, accounts payable reports are about bills that you owe or open bills that have not been paid yet. You can also view your accounts payable aging report, which will show you all your vendors and all your open bills, also organized based on their due dates. So it's really important that you do enter due dates on the bills and on the invoices that are accurate. So when you're looking at these reports, this information is accurate. Now, profit and loss reports, that's your financial health or the snapshot of your financial information. Profit and loss reports will show you income, expenses, and at the end of the day, net income. What's really nice about the profit and loss reports is that they're organized based on accounts and sub-accounts. And if you click on that little triangle to the left of each of the parent accounts, you can expand and collapse those accounts. So if you wanted to see more detail or less detail, that little triangle allows you to do that. There's a big collapse button in the top that just hides all the sub-accounts, but if you expand it, you have that ability to do that. The profit and loss is probably one of the most popular reports. That's why you're gonna see that under the recommended reports, because that's typically what most business owners use to track. Balance sheet is also very similar. You can collapse and expand any of the accounts and the sub-accounts. And the balance sheet shows information like assets, liabilities, and equity, which is the net worth of the business. What you own, what is owed to you, what you owe to other people, and the difference, which is equity. All right, folks, so we're about to get started in a couple of minutes here. Just quick reminder that the purpose of this webinars is so that we prepare you for taking the QuickBooks Online certification exam. So once you log into your QuickBooks Online accountant portal, which you should see the big bright green line at the top, you should click on where it says ProAdvisor on the left hand side, and then click on training on the top of the screen, and then you're going to see all the available trainings are available for you. So you got this one called Introduction to QuickBooks Online for Accountants, and that would be more of a sort of step-by-step how to do things inside QuickBooks Online, which is different than the certification prep. Then you're going to see QuickBooks Online Certification, 7 modules. You would click on Get Started or Resume if you already have started to take that examination. After you take the QuickBooks Online Basic examination, you can then take the Advanced examination. The QuickBooks Online exam Takes about, I would say between 5 to 8 hours of prep and maybe about 2 hours total for the exam, whereas the advanced takes possibly 20 to 30 hours of preparation plus hopefully 6 months to a year of experience, and then another 10 to 12 hours to take the exam. There's a big stark difference between the basic QuickBooks Online certification and the advanced certification. And then once you're certified in QuickBooks Online, every year you're going to have to go back and take the What's New recertification that only really covers new features. Okay. So remember, you want to click on log into your QuickBooks Online accountant account, and all that stuff was covered on the first module. You want to click on ProAdvisor and then click on training and then click on QuickBooks Online certification and get started with any of the 7 modules. All right, perfect. So let me go ahead and close this and let's get back to our slides. Okay, so we're back from our break. Module 5, managing your work. Managing your work. So we'll talk about creating projects and tasks. So inside a QuickBooks Online accountant, if you are organizing your work or your schedule or your calendar, whether you work by yourself or with a team, you really want to be able to maximize your work. And that's what QuickBooks Online calls it. It calls it your work. When you click on the left side of the screen and you click on the work tab, you're going to see a calendar of all the tasks that have been assigned to you. Either you assigned it to yourself or someone else in your team assigned it to yourself. You can get a bird's eye view of what's coming up. You can flag what's overdue, so you can focus on the stuff that's overdue. You can also filter by clients if you want to see just all the tasks for one particular clients. Now, you do not share this work with your clients. This will be the work that your accounting firm, you and your team does, and you do not assign clients tasks through here. That's not the purpose. This is only for you to assign tasks within your team members or for your own firm. All right. Okay. So how do we create a project? So to create a project, we're going to click on the Work tab on the left-hand side, and then we're going to click on Project on the right-hand side of the screen. A project could be a customer, or it could be a sort of a project inside of a customer. So we're going to click on Work, and then we're going to click on Create Project. After we click on Create Project, we're going to name the project, and we're going to assign the entire project or the project delivery to one particular team member. It could be to yourself. You can add the due date, you can add details, you can also make it a recurring project by clicking on repeat. Inside of each project, you can have subtasks. For example, collect bank statements, that could be a task. Enter the transactions through bank feeds, that could be a task. Reconciling the banks could be a task. Reviewing your books with your client could be a task. And maybe finally, delivering financial statements to your clients could be the 5th task. So you can actually group all the sort of the milestones of the tasks within a project inside of the Create Project screen. Now you'll be able to see the projects and the tasks all within work, and you can either have a calendar view or a list view, which is what you're seeing now. Now these tasks can be have their own due dates. That's really important. And you can assign these tasks to different individual team members. There's also something called a client request. And a client request is not necessarily where you're assigning your client a task. What you will be doing is you will be requesting your client to respond to a specific email or send attachments of specific documentation. So this will be a great place for you to notify your client via email that you need bank statements, loan statements, receipts, and things like that. And then your client will be able to reply through the portal and add notes and add the attachments at your request. This is what the screen looks like when you send the request. The client does get an email, but they don't reply via email. They reply within the portal. So you can't assign tasks for your clients, but you can request documents to your client. Okay. Okay. So then once you receive those documents and done the work, You can change the status of the entire project, or you can change the status of the tasks. The importance of doing this is so you can prioritize or get a bird's eye view or where your firm stands in terms of how are we doing with all of our clients. Is this in progress? Is this completed? Has this been canceled? All these things are really important so you can have an overall status for your project, and you can also have a status for each of your tasks. Module 6, preparing your client's books. So, there are some key tasks that we do at the end of each year. In some cases, your clients will do the bookkeeping, and maybe we just go in once a year and make some adjustments or verifications. In some cases, we're collaborating with the client all year long. And in other cases, we are doing the books 100% in our client's behalf, and they are not the ones entering the information. Of course, how you work determines a lot what tasks you have to do at the end of the year. We're going to go ahead and talk about all those potential tasks that we do, regardless of what type of work that we do with our clients. So let's start with verifying the balance sheet accounts that are reconciled. We're going to go and review that real quick. We're also going to talk about how we review the profit and loss. Now, one of the general things that we do is we analyze that the value of the assets and the value of the liabilities are correct. So that's part of the exercise that we do. We also make sure that anything that's taxable, such as sales tax or payroll taxes, that those all match up with the actual forms that we're giving the government. So we'll talk briefly about those. Let's start with the balance sheet. So the first thing we do is we make sure that all banks and credit cards have been reconciled. We make sure that the balances match more or less what the physical bank statements say. We make sure that if there are outstanding transactions, we verified that they're truly open transactions. And in hindsight, most of the times we prepare these financial statements a little bit after the year ended or the month ended, so we can check the next month to see if those transactions clear or reconcile the next month. We want to verify that there are no reconciliation discrepancies in our reports. We want to verify that anything that can be matched against an official document, such as a bank loan or any sort of loans, that we can check that the balances in our balance sheet match that documentation. So we want to have supporting documents for that. Now, when we look at specifically sales tax liability or payroll tax liability, we also want to make sure that those payroll taxes and sales taxes are being paid in the next period. So you want to match up that those dollar amounts match. If they don't match, obviously there's an error in the bookkeeping somewhere. Profit and loss. So usually profit and loss is pretty straightforward. What you want to make sure is that there are no sort of negative amounts in the income section unless they happen to be refunds. We want to avoid having anything under uncategorized income or uncategorized expenses because that's usually a sign of QuickBooks trying to figure out what to put in those transactions. We want to review our W-2s, our 940, 941 payroll forms, and make sure that the total payroll expenses match with those forms. Those are typically the things that we look at. Now, in accounts receivable, one of the things we most often look at, if there are open invoices, we want to make sure that these are not duplicate invoices or these are not uncollectible invoices. One of the common things that accounting professionals help their clients do is to write off any invoices that are not supposed to be still open. So that's part of the exercise. Take a look at really old invoices and make sure these are not real open balances or that the client really completely exhausted all possibilities of collection. So you can write them off and reduce that income for the current year and make the adjustment to accounts receivable. Accounts payable, same sort of situation. A lot of folks tend to duplicate expenses by creating a bill and also the check and leaving that bill open or outstanding. So you want to go through to see if there's any old bills that will never be paid because they were done by mistake or erroneously. Usually if they have really old dates and the customer says, yeah, I don't recognize owing that vendor. I'm pretty sure I don't owe that vendor anything. Then at that point, you would write off those bills by creating a journal entry or a credit against them. Now, if you're running payroll inside QuickBooks, you can go into the taxes portion and run the tax forms through it. Usually, when you configure the QuickBooks payroll feature, that stuff becomes really accurate, where gross pay, payroll taxes, all that stuff goes into the right bucket in the profit and loss report. But as a general rule, you want to make sure that the presentation of your financial statements in terms of payroll, gross payroll and payroll taxes all match your forms. If there's a category for subcontractors or contractor pay, you want to make sure that the total amount also matches the 1099s that you have created. Also, don't forget to actually submit your W-2s and 1099s at the end of the year through QuickBooks. You must have a payroll subscription, which is a separate charge, in order to do that stuff within QuickBooks. And the same thing with 1099s, it's an additional service. Now, all versions of QuickBooks will have payroll, whether it's Simple Start, Essentials, or Plus, but it is an additional service or an additional fee to enable payroll. Now, one of the areas where there usually is a lot of mistakes is where end users inadvertently start deleting or voiding transactions, especially transactions that have already been reconciled or we already have reviewed the period. We're going to talk about closing the books. That's another important piece to protect your books from being changed after you have reviewed them. But in the accountant toolbox, which is a little briefcase on the top of the screen, you will be able to click on that and click on voided deleted transactions. And that will take you to an audit log that shows you only transactions that have been voided and deleted. And you can view the history and decide if those transactions really should have been voided or not. And if they have been and they should not have been, you can recreate them. Reclassifying transactions. This is like what most accountants spend the most time in. Now, you could manually go into each transaction and change the category of a transaction, or you can use the Reclassify tool. The Reclassify tool can be found by clicking on the accountant's toolbox on the top of the screen. It's a little briefcase, and you would click on where it says Reclassify Transactions. Once you click on Reclassify Transactions, you'll be able to select per expense category or income category through a date range all the transactions that are inside of that category. You can actually even filter them by name or payee. You can select them all in batch or hand select a few. And what this allows you to do is once you select the ones that you want to reclassify, just simply by clicking on them or one of them or multiple of them, in the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to select the new expense category or whatever chart of accounts category you want to reclassify to, select it in the drop-down menu, and then click on Reclassify. And now you will find those transactions that were previously on another category. You're going to find them now inside of the new category. Now, this is something that accountants love to do because changing this one by one would take a really long time. So it's really valuable to use the Reclassify tool. Very common it happens when maybe you have one vendor that was all selected to the wrong category, and you can select them all in one shot. Now, one of the issues with the Reclassify tool or the limitations is that you can reclassify any transactions that use an account as a category, but you cannot change any transactions that use items to categorize. So for example, if you create a bill with items or an invoice with items, those items point to the account that they get classified into, but you cannot use this tool to reclassify any item-based transactions. So to change the category or the account that an item-based transaction is pointed to, you actually have to change the transaction, the account that item is pointing into in the account configuration screen. Now, these also allows you to change the classes, right? So if you have classes enabled, you can reclassify classes as well. In this particular screenshot, this company did not have classes enabled. That's why you don't see that classes option in the bottom. But when you have classes enabled, you would see a secondary line that allows you to reclassify the classes on top of reclassifying the categories. We're going to talk now about writing off invoices. So let's move on to writing off invoices. And we're going to talk about writing off invoices, and we'll talk about some of the sort of the good and the bad behind writing off invoices, and in what cases you probably want to think about writing off invoices and which cases you don't. So in the same accountant toolbox section, you're going to click on write off invoices, and it's going to take you to a list of transactions that all show overdue invoices. You can actually pick the date range or a dollar amount that you want to filter overdue invoices by, and you can select multiple invoices in one shot to write off. Now, there's a good and a bad behind writing off. The great thing about a write off is that QuickBooks will actually take the invoice, add a discount to it. It will categorize the discount into the bad debt account. So it will publish the income and the bad debt at the same time, and it will do it as of the original invoice date. Now, there is a challenge behind this, that if you have closed the year or closed the period, when you write off your invoices, you're essentially changing or modifying historically the financial statements, which means that you can actually change the net income of a previous period through write-off invoices. So if you're using the write-off tool to write off invoices for the current period, that's fine. But if you're going to do this for previous dated transactions, you have to be careful of the repercussions. There's two repercussions. One, if there's sales tax involved, you're obviously going to now change historically what your QuickBooks looks like versus what you have reported to your sales tax organization. And of course, you're going to change previous financial statements. So an alternative to using the write-off tool would be to quote unquote write off invoices in the current period by creating a credit memo with a current date instead of using the write-off tool. So just be careful on when you use the write-off tool, especially if you don't want to go back and modify past statements, or if you don't want to have issues with sales tax reporting. Okay, let's move on to trial balances. It's also something that we commonly use sort of a year end as we adjust our books. So there's something called the trial balance report, and there's the trial balance tool. We're actually going to focus on the trial balance report and the tool, both of them, to discuss in contrast. So if you go into the reports section and you click on trial balance, that will take you to the regular trial balance report, and you can export that report or print it, whatever you want to do. But if you click on the accountant toolbox on the top of the screen on the little briefcase and click on trial balance, that will take you to the trial balance tool, which is different than the trial balance report. And the trial balance tool allows you to choose the period that you are currently reviewing. You select potentially the tax form that you will be using to prepare a tax return. You will receive from QuickBooks all your entries, or every balance for every single one of the accounts. And you will be mapping your trial balance accounts to a tax return form. And what this allows you to do is just sort of review account balance by account balance, add some notes, add some attachments, do your mapping, and essentially create a worksheet for you to prepare your tax return. If you're using PTO or Pro Connect Tax Online, QuickBooks will transfer the trial balance straight into PTO, straight into your tax return software. You can also export it to Excel if you're maybe going to use some other tax software that's not compatible with QuickBooks Online, and you can have this trial balance mapped to tax forms. Again, the idea of the trial balance tool is that we close the books, and then to make it easier to do your end of the year work in terms of preparing your tax returns. Now let's talk about closing the books. Now, in QuickBooks Online, there's no formal process to do what a traditional accounting closing is, which is moving all the results from net income to retained earnings and that sort of thing. QuickBooks actually does this automatically. Closing the books actually means protecting the books. And protecting the books has a couple of connotations. So you can close the books by clicking on the accountant toolbox and then clicking on close books. And it will take you straight into the settings area where you can actually close the books. You can also close the books by clicking on the gear menu and accountant and settings and then clicking on the advanced tab. In the advanced tab, you will be able to click a little checkbox where it says close books. You will choose the date that you're closing the books, the date of that closing. You can choose whether or not these books are protected via a password or just via a warning. Some folks find it valuable to just do it via a warning, and they trust that the end user is going to respect the warning and not override it. But I think putting a password that maybe only the administrator or the controller knows is really the best way to go. So by putting the password, you're forcing someone to actually type a number in order to make a change to a closed period. Now, once the books are closed, you won't be able to change a category without receiving a warning beforehand. So if you're going to change the dollar amount or the category of any transactions that have a date previous to the closing of the books, it would actually tell you, hey, are you sure you want to change the amount because the books have been closed? And clients can always override it if they know the password. Now, the idea is that end users don't know the password, that only the accountant knows the password. And if you've closed the books and somebody changed the books that were closed, whether it was password protected or not, there will be a special accountant report. You can click on the accountant's toolbox and go down to accountant reports. And is also in the report center under my accountant reports. And you can click on a report called exceptions to closing date. So exceptions to closing date is a report that tells you every single transaction that was added, modified, or deleted within that closing period, whether somebody had the password or not, if it wasn't password protected, because they changed it post closing. So you also have a great record of any transactions that were changed after that closing date. It's just imperative. It's really important for you to just close the books after you reviewed the period. And if you're going to give that password away, to be able to go back and see if an end user or someone else has changed those books. Again, because as accountants, we really don't want those books to be changed after the fact. And let's move on to Module 7. So QuickBooks Solutions for Clients. So one of the things that's just really important is to get as much information about your client as possible up front so we can understand what their needs are and we can suggest obviously the right solution for them. And in the case that we're migrating from other accounting systems or QuickBooks Desktop, we want to have as much information as possible to make sure that we know how to go about it. Now, there's a couple of cases here. So if you can have a customer that's appointment based, that means that they basically do service for the most part. That actually QuickBooks Online works great for that. There are customers that are retail based, which means that maybe they manage inventory, but more likely they have a website, Shopify, PayPal, and they will be using third-party apps to integrate into QuickBooks to function, and QuickBooks Online works great for that. And then anything that's professional or field services, QuickBooks Online works really great because QuickBooks Online Plus has some job costing features and time tracking features. So we'll talk about that. Now, asking the right questions. So if you see on the first part that we did on Monday, we talked about using a spreadsheet called the new client checklist. And the idea is that you do go through the spreadsheet and you ask the questions one by one. Questions like, Do you think you're going to do estimates? Are you going to manage your payables? Are you going to have recurring transactions? Are you going to do time tracking? Do you have a employee inside your organization that will go into QuickBooks just to log their hours? Do you want to track expenses by customer? Do you want to do class tracking, location tracking? Do you want to have budgets? Do you want to have inventory? The idea is that you use the spreadsheet that's included on the handouts and on the email that was sent to you previously, that you use that in order to start the conversation and talk about all the potential things that your client could need, and also that you, as the QuickBooks Pro Advisor, are suggesting the right product for your client. There are some additional tabs in the spreadsheet that kind of talk about some of the features that are mostly asked for that are not in QuickBooks, and to go to apps.com or something like that to search for additional apps that can solve those issues. And there's also there's a tab that kind of lists all the features by QuickBooks type. Okay, so let's talk about migrating data or bringing data into QuickBooks Online. Generally, there's three ways to migrate data. We're not going to get into too much detail because the advanced certification actually covers this in a little bit more detail, but it's important for you to know overall. You can convert the data from QuickBooks Desktop. So if you have the data in QuickBooks Desktop, you can use the migration feature, and most of the data comes from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. There are some differences and discrepancies, so there's some exercise that you have to do around that, especially when you're dealing with payroll, inventory, those tricky transactions. There is an import tool inside QuickBooks Online that allows you to import customers, vendors, chart of accounts, and products and services. Now, the only caveat is you cannot bring sub-accounts and you cannot bring sub-items, or it's a little bit tricky to bring sub-items into QuickBooks Online with a built-in tool. And of course, you can just always enter information manually, catch up manually, and do that. This is not included in the slides and not included in the test, but there are two apps. One is called Transaction Pro Importer, and the other one is called SASANT, SAASANT, Transaction Importer. And those allows you to import transactions like invoices, bills, expenses, credit card charges. Those will be third-party apps, and those are in addition to QuickBooks, so you pay those separately. But QuickBooks does have a built-in import customers, vendors, chart of accounts, and products and services list. So if there's a test question around that, those are the only four things you can import into QuickBooks. Now let's go through the subscription levels real quick, because as a Pro Advisor, it's also really important that you understand the different subscription levels. If you go to intuit.com or quickbooks.com, you would see a chart that offers three versions of QuickBooks Online. You will have things like Simple Start, Essentials, and Plus. There's a fourth option called Self-Employed. Self-Employed is kind of within the family of QuickBooks Online, but not really. Think of QuickBooks Self-Employed as an app that you use for folks that don't want to track profit and loss and balance sheet. They're just looking for a simple expense tracker for their Schedule C type business. And if you're not a tax preparer, a Schedule C type business is a person that runs a business but doesn't really have a legal entity and does not fill a separate tax return for their business income and expenses. So for most businesses, you will be thinking for sure of QuickBooks Simple Start, Essentials, and Plus. Now, Simple Start would be just to track income and banking. You could also add payroll to that. Essentials will be income, banking, payroll, accounts payable, so bills, and time tracking, recurring transactions. That would all be within Essentials. And then for Plus, you would add sales tax tracking. Actually, sales tax is included in all of them, so I apologize for that. You will include inventory tracking, project tracking, job costing, so you can take expenditures and assign them to the jobs. You can also do billable items or billable expenses. Of course, you can add payroll to that, and you can manage 1099s with both Essentials and Plus. So these QuickBooks Online subscription levels, all of them allow you to add apps to it. QuickBooks Self-Employed is not yet in the apps world too much. I'm sure they're going to add some apps pretty soon. But when they talk about apps, like third-party apps you can add to QuickBooks, you can add them to all three of them. Simple Start, Essentials, and Plus. And apps really, what apps do really is to add functionality that's not inside of QuickBooks. Now we talk about accounts receivable or AR aging, that sort of thing. That's only going to be in Simple Start. And actually, accounts receivable is going to be in all of them, but accounts payable will not be in Simple Start. Accounts payable will only be in Essentials or Plus. That's another quick one that usually tested as well. Want to be careful with that. Okay, so let's talk about some use cases. So let's describe the first use case and then try to figure out what subscription level you would recommend. So we got Ronnie's Rare Books. It's a bookstore owned by Ronnie Tay. Ronnie has 4 employees, including himself. 2 work in the store, and 1 is a bookkeeper. The bookkeeper sounds like they know how to do payroll, and they want a do-it-yourself payroll service. So they want to run payroll, and they want to sort of file their own forms and pay their own taxes. Now she says that she could do it by hand, but she prefers something more automated. She asked about inventory, but when the owner of the store explained that the items are really one of a kind, they don't need to track inventory. They take a periodic inventory, which means they just make an adjustment at the end of the year to account for that inventory. So that's client 1. So based on that, and just put it on the chat box, on the questions box, what version of QuickBooks would you recommend to this type of client? So this would not be in a polling question. This would just be something that comes in. So this is a little bit tricky. They said they had 4 employees and 1 was a bookkeeper. So they haven't really mentioned how many people will be accessing QuickBooks. That would be crucial. Remember, QuickBooks Simple Start only has 1 user, and QuickBooks Essentials has 3 users. So if the owner of the store and the bookkeeper want to access QuickBooks at the same time, for sure they're going to need at least Essentials. Now, they do mention inventory in the use case, but they also mention that because these are one of a kind, they actually don't want to track inventory. They just want to make an inventory adjustment. So far, this case sounds like Essentials would be the best bet. And then the payroll subscription you would add on to that is the regular enhanced payroll, not the full service payroll. Full service payroll means that Intuit will actually take the responsibility over paying the payroll and filing the forms for the client. So the answer to this question, if it was on the test, would be Essentials to client A and enhanced payroll with an enhanced payroll subscription. Okay, client 2. So Carol Valdez is a self-employed taxi driver. Carol is driving Uber for 6 months and is not and does a pretty good job. It's not doing a good job at tracking their expenses. She just wants to get organized. She pays most of her things by credit card, and she wants to track mileage. So based on client 2, what case or what version of QuickBooks would you recommend? So I'll let some of you answer, and we have a mixture between self-employed and Simple Start. The official answer is going to be self-employed, and I'll explain why. Mileage tracking, it's only available in self-employed, not available in any other version of QuickBooks. They also said the word self-employed, so that sort of gave it away. And they didn't mention that she needed to track accounts payable or a balance sheet. If they had mentioned a balance sheet, you definitely would recommend at least Simple Start. If they had mentioned maybe payroll or accounts payable, then maybe you would have recommended Essentials. But for client 2, the best possible answer for this, if it was being tested, it would be self-employed. Perfect. So the way you would use that spreadsheet, the handout that we gave out, is as you go through the questions and look at the use case, you would put yes next to each of the the functions that you see there on column B, and then based on where the yeses land, then you recommend the best version of QuickBooks for your client. Also knowing the price differences. That's another key element. So I'm going to give you the price right now as of this recording, and this obviously is subject to change. Simple Start is $15 a month. Essentials is $35 a month, and Online Plus is $60 a month. Now, depending on when you sign up and how you sign up, there may be a discount of 20%, 30%, 50%, something like that. And that usually that's limited to a time period, but I'm giving you what the post promotion monthly fees would be. So it's really important that your client knows that if they only want one feature that's in Plus and they don't want to pay the difference, that they know that they can have it later on in the future, or they would be sacrificing by choosing a lesser option. So we look at Ronnie's Rare Books. It looks like we confirm that Essentials is the best choice. And when we look at Carol Valdez, we'll confirm that Simple Start is the best choice. So it's a good sort of example of how to use that spreadsheet. Let's talk about billing options. And this is just having to do on whether or not you want your customer to pay the bill for QuickBooks Online, or you want to pay yourself the bill for QuickBooks Online. And just to clarify, bank feeds, online banking, which we covered earlier, that's actually available in all versions of QuickBooks, even self-employed, Simple Start. So bank feed is available across all of them. Anyway, back to the slides here. So wholesale billing would be, you would get a lifetime discount of 50% of the subscription, but you, the accountant, would be paying for your client's monthly charges. So you are deciding to maybe include QuickBooks Online as part of your monthly services, or use QuickBooks Online because it happens to be more efficient than other solutions, even though you have to pay monthly versus, let's say, a fixed desktop software. You decide to pay for it as part of the engagement with your client. Now, you can give your client a discount. I think it's about 30% off for the first 12 months if you set up QuickBooks through your online portal, but then assign your client as the one that will be entering the credit card information and paying directly. And you can pass that direct discount to your client, but after the first year discount, they will be back to paying the full price. So that's the difference between wholesale billing and discount you give to your client. Finally, we'll talk about the QuickBooks Online ecosystem. And this is actually a really important part of Intuit's strategy to create a really strong accounting software that maybe doesn't do everything every industry can do, but have an open API to allow multiple vendors and developers that are best in class to create applications that can do the work better. So when you think about adding some additional functionality, reducing potential duplicate data entry, streamlining industry-specific workflows, adding some additional security by separating the duties on, okay, you as an employee are going to do things in this app, and the accountant will be accessing QuickBooks Online, is basically the strategy around QuickBooks Online. And there is a packaged number of apps that are also discounted with a 50% discount. You can find those by clicking on the app section on the left side of the screen of your QuickBooks Online accountant portal, and you can see the essential apps that have been packaged for accountants, and accountants would have sort of a deep discount through the partnership with Intuit if the accountants are the ones that actually want to pay for the app for the client themselves. You could also always go to apps.com or send your client to apps.com and go through all the different possible apps by category, by discipline, by the solution that they serve. You can click on any of the apps and you would get very clear pricing. You can see peer reviews. You can get an overview more or less on what the apps do. Remember, there are more apps even outside of apps.com that connect to QuickBooks, but only the ones that have gone through a rigorous testing process with Intuit developers actually make it to apps.com. So in apps.com, when you click on that app screen, those are only Intuit approved apps. So you want to keep in mind that there are other apps, but only Intuit approved apps are the ones that are important. Okay. And by the way, this sounds like sort of a sales pitch to QuickBooks and apps and all that stuff. This is actually part of the exam as well. Okay. It's really important as a pro advisor that you know that apps are something that will be part of your day-to-day work. Now, some of the things that we suggest when you are recommending apps or engaging your clients into choosing apps, you definitely want to talk to other pro advisors that have experience. You want to read reviews. A lot of times, other pro advisors review the apps and tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. You want to possibly set up a free trial of the app and connect it to a separate QuickBooks Online file. I'm not a big fan of connecting an app straight into the live file, just in case you still don't know or not 100% sure how that app will affect your books. You want to get a good understanding of the vendor's billing policy. Do they have a contract? How much they charge? If they give a discount, is it based on an annual contract? That sort of thing. And then you want to check that the vendors or the developers have good customer service and a good onboarding process to support accountants and pro advisors through the process of apps. So let's talk about a couple of use cases in which we'll be thinking about recommending apps to our clients. So let's say Ronnie's bookkeeper enters and bills pays in QuickBooks Online, but Ronnie is traveling often. Ronnie doesn't have an effective way to authorize and say, yes, pay this bill, no, pay that, don't pay that bill. And the problem is that sometimes Ronnie wants to pay those bills in time, some that he wants to purposely delay payments for whatever reason. But in some cases, you end up paying a vendor late. You can lose your vendor relationship, get late fees. So what kind of system could they put in place in order for Ronnie to approve these bills to be paid, maybe with a mobile device, conveniently while they're traveling or internet access anywhere in the world? So you would go to the app section. You would click on Browse by Category. You would select an accounts payable, and you would likely land on an app like bill.com. Okay, I don't want to endorse any particular apps, but that is really one of the more popular ones in this area. But all your accounts payable apps would be under that accounts payable section. Perfect. Now let's talk about another problem. So Ronnie gets an Excel spreadsheet from several resellers. These contain book sales that were done externally. This is also common whenever you're selling through a website or some third-party system is reporting your sales. And you don't want to sit there and enter every single sales receipt one by one in QuickBooks from that spreadsheet. So where would you find an app to avoid manual data entry or import that data from Excel? So you would go into apps.com, you would click on Browse Category, and you would click on Data Sync. That just means integrating data. And you will likely run into Transaction Pro Importer or an app called SAS Ant Excel Importer. These apps cost between $10 to $20 a month. You can have it for a month or two while you do the import, or you can keep it permanently if you want to automate data coming from Excel into QuickBooks. Let's talk about the third possible use case. So Ronnie does consulting work from some libraries, and he needs a way to sort of keep track of that work they're doing easily and efficiently. So then maybe they want to use a mobile app to keep track of the time while they're away from the office, to automate payroll and invoicing that billable time to their customers. So they would go to Apps, Browse Category, and click on Time Tracking. They will probably run into an app called T-Sheets, which is one of the most common ones. Intuit actually bought them out, so it's actually an Intuit app. But there are other apps, of course, in the timesheet category. Let's talk about the exam. Really, really important next steps. So once you take the exam and get certified, you don't have to get recertified until next year. So right now, all you need to do is go through your basic QuickBooks Online certification, which is 7 sections. You can take one section at a time, but you cannot save your progress mid-section. So you can finish section 1, submit it, finish section 2, submit it, that sort of thing. Now, it won't be graded until you submit all 7 sections. You must get 80% on each of the sections to pass. If you fail any of the specific sections, it will give you feedback, let you know which sections you failed. You only need to retake. So you only need to retake the section that you failed, and you have 3 attempts each. If you happen to fail any of the 3 sections 3 times, there will be a 60-day lockout until you can take the exam again. Section 1 and 2 are the largest ones, 17 questions and 10 questions. I would say it takes you about an hour and a half to do section 1 and 2, and then it will take you another hour to hour and a half to do sections 3 to 7. Sections 3 to 7 are really fast, 5 to 6 questions each. But yeah, just remember, first section and second section are the biggest. Okay. There are currently no webinars for the advanced certification. There is, however, the virtual conference that QuickBooks does 2 to 3 times a year. So you want to go to qbtrainingevents.com and click on virtual conference and sign up for one. I think there's one in July, and it's a 2-day training. So you go over 2 days to train for the advanced certification. Okay. All right. So again, these exams are taken online from your computer in your portal. You don't have to go to any specific place. This is all done in your computer. Once you pass the exam, you want to download the badge. The badge can be used to put in your business cards, to add to your website. I would recommend use it as often as possible. Even patch them up in your shirts. So people are asking you about that. Hey, you're a certified ProAdvisor. What does that mean? You want to add your picture, not your logo, add a bio, and make sure that you are showing all your certifications in your profile. That way you become searchable for anyone that could potentially hire you. Again, the additional courses can be found in qbtrainingevents.com. Let me go to that website real quick and just kind of help you through it, because you've gone through the 2 webinars for Cert Prep. If you go to qbtrainingevents.com and you click on webinar, notice that there's what's new for QuickBooks Online. That's great. Every month or so, you get all the new stuff that's going on. Here's July. We're doing this webinar again. If you want to take the webinar again, Introduction to QuickBooks Online Accountant. That's actually a little bit more basic, a little bit more in product, focused more on how to use QuickBooks, not necessarily on how to pass the certification exam. And so anything that's a webinar, you will find it here. If you click on virtual conference, notice that there's a virtual conference in July, and usually there is advanced training in the virtual conference. Not always, but you want to check the virtual conference. Click on reserve your place and check it out. Sometimes they do advanced certification, sometimes they don't. Maybe you have to wait for the fall virtual conference for that. If you click on in-person training, notice that, for example, the 28th is tomorrow. So tomorrow there will be some trainers in Chicago, Illinois. Today there's some trainers in Memphis. Today there's some trainers in New Jersey. So you want to check out that in-person training to see what kind of sort of on-site, on-the-field courses is QuickBooks teaching out there. Now let me just show you real quick. Let me go into my QBO portal to cover again where you go to take the exam, because that's actually really important. So I'm going to log into my QuickBooks Online portal, and while that logs in, somebody's saying, what's the difference between the advanced certification and the basic certification? So right, the advanced certification is for folks that already have passed the first certification and have some experience and want to show that they have a little bit more in-depth knowledge about QuickBooks Online. And that's only about 3 to 5% of ProAdvisors become advanced. So it's just really important that you remember that the advanced certification is not easy, not easy at all. So once you log into your portal, and usually you go to qbo.intuit.com and log in with your credentials, you're going to click on the ProAdvisor tab on the left hand side. Then you're going to click on the training tab here in the top, and that will take you into the sections in which you can take your exam. Well, while that loads, I'm going to log into a QuickBooks Online account real quick and do a quick walkthrough of the software. So, yeah, we said that definitely if we were going to finish early, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the software because we haven't done any demonstrations. So, a couple of things. When we talk about the accountant's toolbox, they're talking about this little briefcase in the top, and that's where you're going to see all the accountant tools like Reclassify transaction, voided deleted transactions, write off invoices, close the books. We talked about all those. This is right here called the client switcher. So if you have multiple accounts or multiple clients in QuickBooks Online, you'll be able to quickly switch through multiple clients by clicking on the client switcher. When you're inside of your client's books, you will know because you're going to see a big black bar across the top. If you click on the accountant logo on the left hand side of the screen, it will take you to the accountant portal. And the accountant portal, it's more of the place where you go manage your customers, manage your work, that type of thing. So going back into QuickBooks Online here, we have the left navigation bar. So if you see any test questions talk about the left navigation bar, they're talking about these tabs here on the left hand side. Each of them, such as the banking center, sales, expenses, take you to a different area of QuickBooks Online, and you will have all the transactions associated with each area in that section. On the top of the screen, you're gonna see. Let me go back into my client access here, and then I'm gonna show you some of the functionality. So when you click on the Quick Create button, that's an important terminology. The Quick Create button is on the top right. That's where you're going to see all your transactions. And on the first column, you see all the transactions involving customers, invoices, received payments, that sort of thing. On the second column, you're going to see vendors. These are all the new transactions pertaining to vendors, such as expenses, checks, bills, pay bills, that sort of thing. On the third tab, you're going to see employees. So this is where you run your payroll and run timesheets. And then under other, you're going to find miscellaneous things like bank deposits, journal entries, that sort of thing. When you click on the gear menu next to the Quick Create button, the gear menu will give you access to all the tools and settings. So things like the chart of accounts will be found on the gear menu. Things like account and settings that will be found on the gear menu. Things like your lists, products and services list, recurring transactions, attached transactions. You can actually attach any files you want into QuickBooks Online. Things like importing data. So if you need to import items, accounts, vendors, and customers, you would do that there. The reconciliation button is right there under tools. Budgeting and audit log, that would be under there. And here where it says manage users, this is where you can either add your accountant as a user in the books, or you can add additional users inside of the company by clicking on manage users. So once you click on manage users, you can actually pick which additional users you want to add to QuickBooks. Notice that, let me refresh here for a second. Notice that there's a whole bunch of users created here on the top. Let's give it a second for it to load. There's quite a bit of users. So you see all the users here at the top. These are your regular QuickBooks users. And then here you're going to see your accountant users. So you can have up to 2 accountant users that are active in the books or accounting firms connected to a QuickBooks file. And then depending on the subscription level, if you have Essentials, you can have up to 3 regular users. And if you have Plus, you can have up to 5 regular users. But you can add to Plus up to 25 users with an additional fee. So that's another really important piece of it, which is managing the users. Now, a couple of just important navigation tips, more or less. If you actually click on Control Alt question mark, it will take you into the shortcuts screen. And these shortcut screens are really important because if you're used to using keyboard shortcuts, you hit Control Alt or Control Option if you're in Mac. and any of these keys, it will take you straight into the transaction. So for example, if I want to go straight to an invoice and I don't want to do the traditional quick create invoice, I can actually just hit Control Alt I and it will open the invoice screen for me. Okay, it's also just a really important navigation tip. A lot of folks don't know that coming off the bat. So you would click on Control Alt question mark to get to that screen. Now we didn't talk too much about the chart of accounts. I'm going to go into accounting here on the left hand side, which will take you straight into the chart of accounts. This is obviously a place where accountants spend a lot of time. We talked a little bit about it on the first half of the certification. You will create your accounts here on the top of the screen by just clicking on new, and you can delete or disable any of these accounts that maybe are duplicates or redundant. So for example, let's say one of these accounts are accounts that I don't really plan to use. We can click on this little triangle button and then click on delete, and it will make the account inactive. Now, based on whether or not the account is being used on previous transactions or is attached to maybe some sort of billable item, it will give you an error saying, hey, you can't delete those. So there's just certain ones that you can and you cannot. Okay, and then once you click on dashboard, it will take you to sort of the home page, which will have a summary of income and expenses, and summary of all your bank balances. So there's a little bit similar to the QuickBooks Desktop Insight screen, where you get pretty much sort of a bird's eye view of all your finances. Now, reports are particularly important. If you click on the reports tab, as we mentioned earlier, you're going to have business overview, favorites, who owes you, sales and customers, what you owe. Notice that they're grouped into sort of report groups, so they should be fairly easy to find. But if you really don't know where the report is and you want to go straight to it, let's say you're looking for profit and loss by month or something like that, you type here profit and loss, and you're going to see all the options for profit and loss. Okay, so if there's a profit and loss by month, for example, which is a report that's in QuickBooks, I would click on that and it will take you straight into your profit and loss by month up to whatever date you want to pick on your date range. You can select whatever date range you want, last year, this year, a couple of months worth. You can also pick what you want to see in the column. So if I want to do it by months or quarters, for example, let's say I want to go back a whole year and do it by quarter, you can also see your profit and loss by quarter. Now, I mentioned to you that this little triangle can collapse and expand sub-accounts, which could give you potentially more detail about the expenditures or income if you plan to have more than one account. Or you can just click on collapse here on the top of the screen, and collapse will actually completely collapse all the sub-accounts and not give you the ability to open the sub-account. So it's really up to you presentation-wise on how you want these reports to look. Now you will have the option to print by clicking on the printer icon, and you have the option to export it as either Excel or PDF. So some folks want to export the reports to Excel, maybe add some cosmetic changes, or maybe they just want to save it as a PDF because they want to attach it to an email by hand. However, QuickBooks actually has a straight email feature, so you wouldn't have to save the report as a PDF and then attach it by email. You can simply just click on email and you can email your reports straight from QuickBooks, which is really, really awesome. Another question that I get really often, typically probably one of the first ones, is how do I add my logo? So when you click on the gear menu and click on account and settings, you can add your logo by clicking on their company. And we're going to click on, actually they changed it. I think it's under sales and under customized look and feel. And when you click on any of the styles here, you can actually edit your logo. So if you want to change the particular logo that's on an invoice, you can do that. If you want to do it invoice by invoice, because you can actually have multiple invoice styles. Again, you would go into, let me go back for a second because I went a little bit fast. You would go to gear, account and settings, and sales, customized look and feel. So that's where you change the logo in a sort of invoice by invoice basis. But under the company section, okay, now it's showing, there's a link of, I don't know who put that up there, but that's obviously not a logo. But if you click on that little picture or the empty box, then you can actually click on that and choose a different picture from your computer to make as the official logo. Click save, and that's the logo that will show up by default in all of your invoices. And you also have the choice to show that logo in your management reports. So when you click on reports, I'll show you that real quick. And you click on management report. These are specialty type of reports, and you can build custom packages of reports. And these reports are designed for accountants to give clients like a more sort of visual package. And these reports could contain your logo, which happens to be my picture in this case. But these reports could contain a logo, contain a table of contents, really nice and beautiful presented profit and loss, balance sheet, and any other reports you want to add to that, plus comments, add-ons, footers, that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's just very difficult to overall sort of sell you on QuickBooks Online by presenting it in 5 to 10 minutes like that. But I do have my own video in my YouTube channel, so I'll show you that real quick. If you go to YouTube and type QuickBooks Online tutorial, I have two major videos. I have a video that's about 2 hours long. It's free. This is all 100% free. That's called QuickBooks Online Complete Walkthrough. This video doesn't actually show you anything regarding the actual exam. So I know we focus most of the time in exam, and we're creating here some filler with some additional information. And there's also sort of a more summarized video that's 25 minutes where I do sort of do a quick walkthrough of every single transaction inside QuickBooks, so you can choose to watch a 25-minute briefing or go with a long 2-hour that kind of walks you step by step on how to set up your QuickBooks, set up your chart of accounts, set up your beginning balances. This is obviously beyond the exam. You don't need this for the exam. These are just additional resources. And I also mentioned one of my very popular videos, which is my QuickBooks Online bank fee tutorials. That's about 36 minutes. So with these 3 videos that show up under just typing QuickBooks Online tutorial, which happen to be the top ones, those I think you could do really, really well just with those. And there are tons of content makers that create YouTube videos. I'm not the only one, but at times it does feel like I am the only one, because I make quite a bit of videos in YouTube. So anything that I have created, you can just search it by using my name and typing QuickBooks next to it. And YouTube has a pretty good library. So in summary, between the QuickBooks Online training events website with all the webinars, the YouTube videos, the training content inside of the training modules, and that you take previews to taking the exam, you have plenty of materials to pass that exam. And I sure hope that all 300 something of you that attended this take this exam today, this week, and pass. And I would love to hear some success stories about that. I think we're done at this point. It's almost 3:30. Thank you very much. We'll end the webinar at this point, and I hope you pass the exam, and good luck.